Hello listeners, it's Mark here, back with our second My Rugby League Story, and the first from one of our wonderful listeners. If you haven't already done so, please go back and listen to our last episode, which was my own personal rugby league story, about my journey from casual rugby league viewer to Wigan supporter home and away, with the subtext to all of that being, without that story, there would be no Super League pod. This is the story of another Mark Butler. Regulars over the years will be familiar with Mark's name. He's been around the show since our very first year in 2014, with views that go beyond his teams, Widnes and the North Wales Crusaders. Mark sent us his story by email for us to read to you, so here it comes. The genesis of my rugby league story from North Wales, where even rugby union is sidelined, is from the early 90s, where visits to my dad's house were punctuated by games on grandstand, usually involving the great Wigan teams of the era, while my sister skulked around the house muttering about fucking rugby. Once the games were on Sky, I didn't really think about the sport much for a while though. There was a change during the 2000 World Cup. This is badly thought of by most fans, but I loved this tournament and attended my first live game. At the time I was single, on the dole, living at home and without much going on bar Wrexham FC games, and I couldn't get on board for the unglamorous looking Wales versus Cook Islands game at the racecourse quick enough. Wales came back to the racecourse to play England in a thriller the following July, and I could barely believe how much fun it was. Thankfully, by this time I'd found work and started giving Uncle Rupert some of my cash. My main motivation for doing this was to watch Premier League football, but Super League games worked their way into my life. I used to watch rugby union games on Friday nights that kicked off early and then switch on to the second half of the Super League games. But like all correct thinking people, I soon saw this was a folly and made sure I watched the Super League games from the start. A trip to the Grand Final soon became an annual treat. My first club game was the 2002 final, a great game set up by a late Sean Long drop goal and Chris Joynt's voluntary tackle shenanigans that made sure I didn't end up sleeping on a bench at Manchester Piccadilly. It was a great experience and I spent quite a lot of time turning round just to watch all the St Helens fans behind me. I suppose I should support them really, but this all happened during my home and away years with Wrexham, so I didn't get round to committing to a club or attending games outside the Grand Final. During one of these trips I ran into one of the few people who also followed rugby league, specifically Widnes. As I tried to save money and sanity by cutting my Wrexham trips down, I ended up filling the gaps with trips to Widnes games rather than with financial prudence. Just in time for relegation from Super League and more earthy pleasures of games against Batley and Oldham and the big boot of Mick Nannin. The 2009 Northern Rail Cup final victory is probably the highlight of that time, in the blazing sunshine in Blackpool's old temporary stand, inspired by Kevin Penny and Craig Hall. They won't exactly be called Widnes legends, but they played their part in a return to Super League being rubber stamped. While marriage, children and forced financial prudence meant these trips eventually became a treat rather than a way of life, those visits kept it real, while I continued to consume rugby league from Sky as well. Crusaders coming to Wrexham is a story of its own. It was, and is, an unlikely place for a rugby league team to pitch up, and like a lot of the people, I enjoyed their games in Super League playoff season, although if you're someone who paid full price to go to those games, you got rinsed. That would end up coming home to roost. If you were paying attention, it became clear that the club's presence was just part of power games involving the owners of the town's clubs with a lucrative property deal on their minds. The football club emerged from this bruised and bloodied, but the rugby league team was never strong enough to do the same. After the reformation of the club, it took some time to get back on board with the club due to a number of reasons, and ludicrously, the club's reduced circumstances actually helped with this. My daughter has autism, and it was a struggle to find appropriate activities for her. She's an outdoor type, and Crusaders' move to a stadium with lots of space to run around in has been cynically exploited by me to go to games, although my daughter's sensory difficulties need to be carefully managed in a sport where they'll let off a big hooter 4 times a game. I frequently end up trying to see the action obscured by the hammer cage at the Municipal Athletics Stadium the club calls home these days. My younger son has got on board recently and can be heard to say that rugby is much better than football. We have missed the games this last year, so at a time where football's cockeyed intensity and venom has less and less appeal to me, perhaps rugby league can go on to be our thing. Although I don't doubt that some will scoff at the idea, I'll find more measured behaviour there. I hope that money can continue to make its way to League One and to keep this option open to us locally. We wouldn't want to let Rugby Union back into the mix on my son's say-so, would we? Finally, thank you to Super League Pod. It's been enjoyable to contribute from these faraway rugby league lands where James Roby and Liam Farrell aren't the superstars they deserve to be. So I hope you enjoyed hearing Mark's story as much as I did. He knows how to get in my good books with a sweet Liam Farrell comment to close out with. And just so you know, everyone, Liam Farrell got the best bleep test score on Wigan's return to training this pre-season, but I digress. It's brilliant to hear how Mark's love for the sport has become his family's love for the sport, especially as his heartland adjacent, kind of like me, rather than living in a heartland hotbed area. Like so many of you guys. I also liked hearing that he too was baked in the Blackpool sunshine for that 2009 Northern Rail Cup final. It was when the temporary stand that is still at Bloomfield Road was a temporary stand without a roof rather than the one that now is there with a roof. I wonder, actually, Mark, if he spent the Saturday and the earlier part of the Sunday at Fylde Rugby Union's Woodlands ground watching the Northern Rail Nines as well. The final of that competition moved over to Bloomfield Road as the curtain raiser to Widnes versus Barrow's Northern Rail Cup final, and remarkably the local town team, the Blackpool Panthers, managed to win that tournament, beating Sheffield 14-10 in the final. The absolute highlight of that club's 6-year existence. But I digress again. Shocker. If you've been inspired, you too can send us your own rugby league story. Tell us about what got you hooked, what games stick out as the most meaningful in your time as a fan so far, or whatever else about your rugby league story you want to share. Games you've played, people you go to games with, matchday routines, all that sort of stuff. Like Mark, you can email your story to superleaguepod@gmail.com for us to read out, or if you prefer, you can record the story yourself and send that recording over to us. Alternatively, we could record a chat about your rugby league story and put that up instead. We've already had a few expressions of interest and tweets about it and stuff, so that's great. And we want to hear from as many as you as we can, basically. Something to keep us going at the moment. But until you hear from us again, please stay safe, look after yourselves and your loved ones, and we can look forward to a time where we can share these stories together in the stands or at the bars after the game. Goodbye.